All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session on improving access, analysis, and awareness of satellite data for air quality and health. I'm Crowe Malings from Morgan State, one of the HAQAST team members. I'll be moderating the session. And we have 4 speakers and then time for Q&A at the end. And we'll be starting off with Jenny Bratburd from University of Wisconsin-Madison, who's one of the HAQAST co-investigators.
Okay, thank you so much, Carl. Thank you, Tracy, for recommending I do this. I'm just going to give a kind of a broad overview and of some of the barriers, and we will also get more into this during other talks in the meeting. I also recommend checking out Carl's talk tomorrow morning. First off, I wanted to test out this new survey tool in Zoom. So some people have already been answering online and in the meeting, but if you haven't yet, we'll take a minute. So I don't know that there's anything that I'm going to say that's going to change your world here, but I am very interested in sort of your experiences, where you're coming from. And if I'm looking at what we have on the poll, it looks like most people are coming from an air quality background. But people, if there's anyone in the room that answered something else, does anyone want to shout out what other backgrounds they're coming from?
Public health.
Public health, okay.
Economics.
Economics, all right. Others?
Space reporting.
Space reporting. Wow. I want to be in that field. Anyone else?
Machine learning.
Machine learning, of course, okay. All right, so we got a variety. Have you ever used satellite data? So it's looking like a third have regularly used satellite data, and it's going up. And then about 50% sometimes, and we have 12% not yet. This is a great meeting to be at to get started. What topics are you interested in? It looks like the leading topic of interest is small-scale regional investigations, followed by large-scale, followed by modeling, and then something else. So if folks want to chime in about what topics you're interested in. No. I need one. Give me one.
Is anyone looking at forecasting?
We got forecasting. Okay, we got some forecasting. Anything else?
About policy or policy development?
Policy. All right. You're shy. That's okay. All right. And then what tools? This has been a question I get frequently. It looks like our winner is Python with 60%, followed by about a tie between R and Excel. Then ArcGIS, and then a lot of these online tools. Did anybody answer something else? Want to say what other tools they might use?
NCS.
Sorry, what was that?
NCS.
Oh, okay. Great. Yeah. And some of us don't analyze too. Oh,
Google Earth Engine.
Google Earth Engine. Yeah, it could be an online tool, I guess. Yes. Okay. So that's a good one too. Okay. Well, thank you for go ahead and poll. Thank you for participating in that. I wanted to test that out. And then click on that slide again. Okay, so okay, so when I think about why we're all here, I often think about the importance of protecting our health, and this is actually driven home to me by my mom, who I invited to our meeting in St. Louis, because she grew up in the 1950s in LA, which had very, very bad air quality. And she learned, coming to a HAQAST meeting, that it was actually a case study in people's textbooks. And so she really talked about that. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of advances since then, but we can see that there's still new ongoing challenges. So I was keeping that up in mind. I also want to say, when I'm not working at HAQAST, I work in the Climate Solutions for Health Lab. And so this is another reason where we think about air quality often. And the benefit of this role is that I get to look out from a very zoomed out perspective with policy and doing a lot of reviews and reports, and really working on the air quality benefits of climate mitigation. So there's a lot of potential benefits that I won't go into here, but a lot of these folks are here. So I want to shout out Nick, I think Caitlin is around, BJ, some others. So just wanted to shout out those folks. So getting into this, I wanted to talk about some of the key barriers. So we saw that, a lot of people, some people in the room are regularly using satellite data. A lot of people are sometimes or maybe getting started. And a lot of times we run into these barriers. So some of those are having to do with the instrument itself. Some of them have to do with how they fit into our policy context, what we're using them for. And some of them have to do with just how easy they are to use. So from my perspective of 5 years of listening on HAQAST meetings, I've really been astonished by the advancements in satellite data, even since the time that I've been here. For example, the launch at Tempo and this whole constellation of geostationary satellites, where you get this hourly data, having to update our documentation about what you can do with satellite data, because before there's some things that was like, that's not possible. Now it is possible. I also want to shout out another upcoming mission, the NASA Maya mission, that's going to be measuring these different particle types. So keep an eye out for that. There's always new things. So Tracy likes to say, when we think about a stakeholder challenge, sometimes the answer is, yes, that's possible, and here's how to do it. There's an existing data set, let's go do that. And sometimes the answer is, no, that's not possible yet. But sometimes, and this is where HAQAST comes in, is maybe.
Yeah.
And that's where we get this whole room to explore, and every day it's expanding. The other thing we think about a lot, especially with our air quality management folks, is the policy landscape, how this fits in. And I think over the years, this has also changed. Tracy and I and others on HAQAST worked on this review last year, which is very thorough. And air and waste management talks about the last 15 years of satellite data for air quality, some of the ways that it is used in policy. And we've had some guides and some partnerships with EPA over the years. And so I think there's always going to be some inherent uncertainty when you connect scientific data with a sort of legal landscape, because in science we have this sort of inherent uncertainty to all our measurements, right? And in the legal context, we kind of want a binary yes or no. But a lot of advancements, I think, have been made over the last decade or so. You can find some resources to dig into that on HAQAST and talking to the many people here. Now, the other barrier that has to do with time, that has to do with the ease of use. We at HAQAST are trying to be a front door to all these data tools, so you can find a whole bunch of resources that we can lead you to, and a whole bunch of resources that other people are working on. And I'm also really excited for Juan's Tiger team that's going to step this up a whole nother level, and for Carl's work with Air for US. And so we kind of have these short explainers to help those people who've never used it before kind of think about how they might. We have our flow chart to help guide people, because there's so many different resources. And I think Juan's Tiger team is kind of going to build this out even further. And then there's a ton of training and tutorials that we can connect you with, including the NASA Applied Remote Sensing Training Program, RSETs, which I would highly recommend if you're one of those folks like on the fence and thinking, I'd like to do this more, but you maybe need a little more guidance. And I kind of put this out as kind of you'll learn about it, you'll pick your data set, you'll learn the tools, and then you're good to go. Sometimes you just break everything and nothing is working the way you expect. And that happens in research. And so I've come to realize, especially coming to these meetings, talking with you, seeing how things develop, it's less of a step-by-step process, but more of a cycle, as John alluded to, with the virtuous cycle this morning. And so this really is one of the barriers that I don't think we talk about is having a community, having relationships, because I think for some of our NASA scientists, we might have this dream that everyone is going to learn how to use satellite data. They're all going to be programmers, and that's maybe a bit unrealistic and maybe not a good use of everyone's time, right? We have all this different expertise. How can we make the best use of that? And so building these relationships so you have someone to reach out to say, hey, I would really love to have this data for my health study or to analyze this policy, like how can we connect? And that's why we're here. So I recommend, take advantage of that opportunity. So yeah, that's just the sum. And I know I said time is limited. And I also wanted to say, I was kind of thinking of this with Jesse Marquez, who had come to one of our meetings and given a talk from LA, who passed away last year. He was really monumental at getting some policies passed in Los Angeles and working on the problem of air pollution near ports. And so, really treasure your time together because sometimes it's more limited than you might think. Thank you. And with that, I'll just say there's lots of ways to connect. You all have my email, so thank you.
Right, thank you very much for that overview. Okay, and our next speaker will be Randall Martin from University of St. Louis, who is also a HAQAST team member.
Great. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So this talk will be more technical. My more general talk will be tomorrow. And this talk today is motivated by the advances we're seeing in artificial intelligence and the opportunity we have to apply those advances to relate satellite observations to ground level air quality. And this is a challenging framework and it's a dynamic environment. And we'll begin with satellite observations as our primary data source, motivated by the gaps that exist in ground-based monitoring and the need to fill in those gaps with particular attention of focusing on predictability in regions away from monitors. And I'll contrast two different approaches for doing so. The top approach I'll call a direct approach, and we'll apply deep learning to directly relate those satellite observations to ground level PM2.5, treating ground-based measurement data as truth or labeled data. And I'll contrast this with a more involved approach that begins with those satellite observations, these columnar observations, and applies a chemical transport model that incorporates equations representing the physics and chemistry of the atmosphere and uses that information to relate these columnar observations to ground level PM2.5 to produce a geophysical prior, and then apply deep learning to predict the bias in that prior versus the measurements. The reason for this alternative framing is twofold. First is the spatial heterogeneity in the measurements, which is obvious. There are more measurements in North America, Europe, and East Asia. And the second is the spatial autocorrelation in the data. And by that, I mean the likelihood that a measured quantity in a given location is similar to a measured quantity nearby. To illustrate that point further, I'm showing you a time series of two different PM2.5 monitors in the St. Louis area, a kilometer apart. They are nearly identical. Had we used one of those monitors to train a deep learning algorithm and withheld the other one for out-of-sample cross-validation, an approach that's typically used for machine learning approaches, there would be no meaningful assessment of skill. It's simply autocorrelation that drives the relationship between those two. So we need a method that then rigorously assesses performance away from those monitors in order to understand that the value that's being added through machine learning. And so we'll do so by imposing a buffer in pink around each test site in red, vary the radius of that buffer, and exclude from training all of the training data sets that fall within that radius. And then we evaluate the skill as a function of that buffer radius. Here I'm showing you an assessment of that skill. We'll use R squared as an assessment of skill versus buffer radius in the horizontal. The red line shows that geophysical a priori is independent of monitored data. The green and yellow lines show the deep learning algorithm either with output from this process-based chemical transport model or without that output in yellow. For a buffer radius of 0, which is what is commonly used in machine learning, both approaches perform with very high R squared, far exceeding the geophysical a priori. But that largely reflects spatial autocorrelation. As the buffer radius increases, both approaches degrade in performance, or R squared. The one that includes output from a chemical transport model relaxes towards the geophysical a priori, whereas the one that excludes that information degrades much more rapidly, R squared decreasing by a factor of 3 over this distance. And that makes sense. A chemical transport model is designed for out-of-sample prediction. It's designed to represent processes in the atmosphere independent of the availability of measurement data. So there's additional information that is being provided to this algorithm. And this thus highlights a synergy that exists between a data-driven deep learning approach and a process-based algorithm that includes physics and chemistry to represent the atmosphere. I'll then take this further with the objective of inferring PM2.5 chemical composition. Begin with that satellite-derived PM2.5 total mass concentrations, that algorithm that I just described. Use this chemical transport model to chemically partition those mass concentrations into their chemical components. And then again, apply deep learning to predict the bias in those chemical component a prioris versus the ground-based measurements of chemical composition. An approach that is becoming popular to assess the importance of different predictors in deep learning algorithms is known as a SHAP analysis. That's what's shown here. The variables are ranked in order of importance of their contribution to this prediction. The prefaces are geo, which implies a geophysical a priori that we're using that includes output from the GeosChem model, and GC, which is representing fields that are directly output from the GeosChem model. The messages I'd hope to convey are that output from the GeosChem model from both of those parameters are important for predictors in this spatial variability. Again, highlighting that synergy. The result of this approach is shown here for total mass concentrations in the bottom center across North America, and for examples of chemical components in the top. What you're seeing is this pronounced level of heterogeneity in describing the distribution of PM2.5 across the continent, far better than we could achieve from GeosChem alone, and also far better than we could achieve from deep learning from a direct approach alone. Had we excluded GeosChem output from the deep learning algorithm, the R squared would have diminished by 20 to 30%, depending on component. Had we used GeosChem alone and excluded deep learning, the R squared would have degraded by 20 to 40%. So again, the synergy that exists between process-based algorithms that incorporate physics and chemistry as well as data-driven algorithms. An example of the resultant data time series is shown here for 25 years, roughly. And you're seeing this real success story in air quality control across North America, driven by reductions in sulfate in red and its associated ammonium in pink. As we think about air quality control moving forward, we'll need to be thinking more intensely about some of the other components, such as organics, that you see a little blip at the end, reflecting some of the increase in fire frequency and intensity that's occurring, especially in the West. So I'd like to leave you then with the growing confidence in the inference of ground level air quality from satellite remote sensing as, again, the primary observational data set, but bringing in a powerful synergy of both process-based information that incorporates physics and chemistry, as well as data-driven deep learning approaches that provide these data sets that we make publicly available for a variety of applications, and look forward to working with you in those data. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Sarah Kroening from Children's Hospital of Wisconsin.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So I am Sarah Kroening. I'm from Children's Hospitals of Wisconsin. I have actually been invited to speak at other HAQAST conferences. So I've spoken about Love My Air Wisconsin, which I will get to, but as I get started, I want to speak a little bit more to the public health portion of what we're doing at the Alliance and how that ties into Love My Air and our work to expand our program. And so I am part of our environmental health initiative at the Alliance, and that is a small but mighty team. Carissa Hoyam is my program leader, and she's sitting in the back today. So the two of us are the ones leading this work around the state of Wisconsin. And the foundation of our work really comes from, again, what's in the environment and how it affects the health. And so when we look at our children across the state of Wisconsin, 500,000 children and adults have asthma. One person dies every 5 days because of asthma. 1 in 3 children with asthma will miss a day of school. And then 2/3 of lead poisoned children live in Milwaukee County. And so when we look at these statistics, that's really what's driving our work to make sure that we are addressing issues across our state that can have a greatest impact on trying to change some of this information. So our goals are, as I'm mentioning, create healthy environments where kids live, learn, and play. They're working to reduce asthma-related emergency department visits, provide education, resources, and tools to support awareness and reduce the impact of asthma and lead poisoning in our state, and then advocate for healthy environments to protect their health. So we do that by, Carissa leads and coordinates the Wisconsin State Asthma Program, the Wisconsin Asthma Coalition. We run the school and childcare walkthrough programs where we look for asthma triggers and then offer low cost or no cost options to make those changes. And then also looking at providing medication assistance. And so helping families access asthma medication at a discounted rate so that they can actually get their medication and support their children using it. And then the last one, which I've spoken to and I'm going to get to more, is the Love My Air Wisconsin program, where we are installing outdoor air sensors at schools and pairing that with education. And we've expanded that to also include local communities. Actually, the Madison Children's Museum is hosting a sensor, and they have our kiosk. So a little plug for if you're looking for something to do tonight, check out the museum. It's also really fun for adults too. So how does this all connect with HAQAST and using satellite information? We are really grateful. Love My Air program received a grant to continue expanding our work. So we are continuing to work with Milwaukee Public Schools, but we're also expanding to 5 more counties, which are highlighted by the boxes. And actually this one is 2 counties. It might from further away look like 1. And so again, using asthma burden to understand where we should direct our efforts, and then looking within these counties to partner with different school districts. And so as we've worked to partner with different school districts, especially right now, there's limited capacity to sometimes engage with additional requests from outside partners. And so one of our first counties that is engaging is Rock County. And we were hoping to work with a couple of different districts, but unfortunately, we were only really able to make connections with one. And so we started to think through what data can we use to really show where this impact will be? And so we not only use the asthma burden reports, local regulatory monitors, but then we also turn to some of the satellite imaging that we have access to with Temple Lights. My expertise is nowhere near what is in this room. So that is where we're starting with just even, filling in some of the gaps that we have to understand. where exposure is most occurring in our state. And so as you can see here, these were two different images. We did look at multiple images over multiple days, but these really capture some of our concerns and why we are felt working with just one district to start was going to be appropriate. So we're starting with the school district of Beloit in Rock County. And they're in the blue dots, so very, very close to the border. And as we look at that location in comparison to, NO2 emissions coming from a lot of times Chicago, our lovely neighbor south. And, again, being on the border, they are having those higher exposures to not only their local sources of pollution, but then that pollution from Chicago. So it made sense for us to partner with the school district of Beloit. And so we are just I got an email this morning saying they're finalizing their last sensor. So there's 5 additional sensors across Beloit, which is really exciting. As we've been expanding, like I mentioned, some of these school districts that we originally thought would, be able to partner with us, unfortunately, due to different reasons, have had limited availability. So we had wonderful connections with Racine Unified School District. They had already been doing some work with us. So we're really hoping and looking forward to partnering with them. But what we're running into is that their buildings don't have outdoor outlets, and we're using purple air sensors. So that really limits the capacity to work with the school district right now. And so there's an additional funding at the time to install outdoor outlets. And so again, we went back to what data we have, what other information can we use to determine the next best place. And so as we looked, again, using tempo satellite data, it helped us realize that Caledonia, which is a very close city to Racine, so not only would it still help Racine, access some of the data, but they too have some exposures that we were not realizing. They're also very close to a power plant that is still coal. So it made a lot of sense to start reaching out to them. And I'm happy to say that it looks like they have more capacity to engage with us. And so more to come from that conversation. But this information helped us see some of those other areas that we could go to next. Additionally, as we were looking across the state into Brown County and trying to figure out which school districts we should be really focusing on, and looking at tempo satellite data, some interesting observations came around Sheboygan. And so we hadn't previously considered Sheboygan, but after realizing how frequently they also have exposures to different emissions from NO2, it's now kind of driving us to think about having our next expansion. It might include Sheboygan. And again, it seems to be like possibly exposures from Chicago, but also they too have a coal power plant. And so again, these different pollutants that are coming into play and wanting to make sure that we're not just looking at that PM 2.5 readings that we have access to and the Asberg data, but all of this other information that's available, especially through the satellite information. And last, a little plug for some students coming to the poster session this afternoon. At the last conference, I mentioned work that I was doing with a local church and youth apprentices there. So they are coming to share out the work they've done and how really using images from Tempo have really helped inspire and also kind of bring awareness to community members about their exposures. This is something that isn't always captured in the PM 2.5 sensors. Last summer, we were doing a lot of work with them. And most of the time we were between the green and yellow zones. There are some times where we were orange or red, and that usually was from wildfires. So to look again at look at other pollutants and how those are impacting the area that they're in, again, just kind of helped see a bigger picture in addition to those local sensors. And one other mentioning is that we've just been starting to do some no idle campaigns, and having kids explore Tempo Light has also really helped kind of drive the importance of no idle campaigns as well. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Our final speaker is Kevin Crowe from Bratburd.
Be all right over here.
Yeah. I don't think it was long.
No, I don't have any slides. No, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what I do with the Washington Post. I'm a data journalist, and there are a ton of us at the Washington Post. We work on different beats. So I work on climate, the environment. That way people work on business, economics, investigations, all that good stuff. So I'm not normally in this kind of scenario. You're normally out there asking these questions. So hopefully you'll have some for us. But what I do a lot is work with scientists and work with data sources to answer sometimes very simple or sometimes more complex than we thought questions. And some of those stories fall into a couple of different buckets. And so one bucket would be kind of like a short-term to mid-range story, which might be about like wildfire smoke or something like that. So we would be searching for data to show patterns, to kind of like help our readers figure out their day, figure out their week, and what they're going to do, and what kind of wildfire smoke and particulate matter pollution might be in their area. Another type of story that would be a little bit more of a mid-range and kind of an accountability would be, measuring pollution. We haven't done a ton with air pollution, but measuring pollution and kind of seeing what actors in the area might be there to be held accountable. And then a final one would be kind of a long-term explanatory story. Thank you.
Yeah, raise your hand with questions. I'll bring the mic over to you in the room, and we'll monitor the online chat as well for questions. So,
thank you all for a wonderful talk. My question is to Randall Martin. So, in your presentation, you refer that as physics and chemistry informed. I think the term chemistry informed is misleading. It is still data driven. It's more actually CTM driven now, because the model is understanding from the CTM, understanding its biases, and correcting it, trying to fuse the technical along with it. We say chemistry informed when actually we incorporate the equations, chemical equations inside, chemical weights, whether it be ODs or PDs. When the model understands the equations, then we can say fully that the model is chemistry informed. But currently, the model is still CTM driven. And my second question is regarding, I saw that because you have to prepare for the uncertainty over the corners of domain, which actually have more uncertainty towards the Canada and Mexico region. So I want to ask that how is this prepared, uncertainty pixel by pixel map, and how do you explain and more importantly validate this uncertainty?
Thank you for those questions. And yes, your first point about the semantics and what we'll describe as chemistry informed. And what I'm trying to convey is that we're incorporating process level information from a chemical transport model that is otherwise unavailable to the deep learning algorithm. I take your point that we are using that process level information, and I describe that process level information as both physics and chemistry, which I understand is that point of contention. But I'm describing it as a functional relationship that exists within the data sets that were used for training that is otherwise inaccessible to a pure data-driven model. So that's the distinction that I'm working on, trying to convey. And I understand that there's some semantics on how one would choose to describe that. And you conveyed that that may have different meaning in different subfields. The second one about uncertainty is something I'm not sure I showed in this talk, but it is something, spatial distribution. I intended to show a spatial distribution of concentration, and hopefully that's what I showed, although I'm starting to doubt it. But in the paper, we did describe uncertainty. And the way that we're describing uncertainty is that we will use a relationship of the skill as a function of the training data sets. It's a complex term. It's called Mahalanobis distance. I don't think I got the pronunciation quite right, but it's representing especially effectively the variance in the fields that are used for prediction And we'll look at that performance as a function of buffer radius in order to inform uncertainty. Again, that's not something I think I showed, but it's something I'd be happy to talk about further with
In
you.
one of the slides, the bottom one, you had a uncertainty map.
Did I? Okay.
Maybe I can take it very.
You can talk about it maybe more afterward.
Thank you. Great.
Question for you, Sarah. You acknowledged in your talk a real problem of ground-based measurements, ready electrical power. Has there been any consideration in other sensor models that maybe have solar panel capabilities or in your work?
So when we originally picked the purple air sensors, part of that was in our partnership with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. So they had done their own studies on purple air and had recommended those as something that we could also use. The city of Madison is actually using solar powered sensors here. So if you were to go to our site, there's like 40-ish sensors across the city of Madison that they are using with solar power. A problem in Crowe, Wisconsin is that, especially over the winter months where we have lots of clouds, that impacts how regularly they're reporting out that data. And so currently we're sticking with purple air, but it's something that we've considered for the future of like, what do we look at in, those other options.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you to all of you for being here. This is really great. And I think it's a really exciting panel here because there's using data in a wide range of capabilities. And I just want to make a comment wondering that I was so excited, Kevin, for you to be on the podcast. I have had, hold on.
Yeah.
A lot of phone conversations over the past 2 years with data journalists who are using data and actually in things that would really be a PhD thesis, trying to use it to answer a question that nobody's asked before. And I guess this is a question, for all of you about kind of when is data good enough? Because, and of course it can always get better, but I think, Randall was laying out this idea that like, we can really be pushing the data further and further and further, and we need to. On the other hand, we also needed to be answering immediate questions for reporting, immediate questions for designing sensor networks. And, to Jenny's point, like there's a very wide community who is using it for a lot of different things. And I guess I'm wondering if, maybe all of you could kind of reflect on this question of where does one say that data are good enough for your use and where are they not good enough for your use? And like, how do we draw that line?
Sure. I mean, journalists, I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for, all the journalists here, but I think we rely on scientists a lot to kind of guide us in that process. So, I'm not a scientist by training. I do data analysis. I work with data tools. We do a lot of visualization. But typically what I'm using it for is more of an explanatory purpose or an investigative purpose. To kind of like show what's going on in a community. And so what we need are, data and approaches and methodologies that are going to be accurate. Would they stand up to publication? Maybe sometimes, yes, I think sometimes we do work that's really quite that strong. But I think also what we're trying to do is explain phenomena to readers, right? There's a big world out there. And we're competing for attention, and there are very important stories to tell, and there are a lot of important trends to talk about. And so what we want to do is be as accurate as possible and informative as possible. And we rely on, kind of like this room, everybody at NASA, everybody, all sorts of federal agencies, the universities, to spend their time, kind of talking with us about what they think is important and also what is like good enough to go out because we're publishing on a pretty tight time frame sometimes, right? Like sometimes it's hours, sometimes it's days, sometimes it's a year. We get some time to work on projects that are very cool. But we really can't we understand that there are there are data sources that do have long lag times, and that's just kind of the way it is. But kind of the more immediate, the better, and the kind of the best way we can meet in the middle on that is what we're looking for as journalists.
I just spoke.
Well, I happen to work for two different bosses who have two different philosophies about this, and because I think, as scientists, we do tend to want to hold back until everything's been peer reviewed and checked off and validated. And there's a lot of good reason for that, because if you say the wrong thing, that potentially gets spread, and that it can harm reputation, that can harm the whole science mission, broader team, so you want to avoid that. At the same time, I also see a lot of these rapid response, these developing news stories, or even just in the policy landscape, like responding to a comment period or something where a new issue comes up and you don't have an existing publication on it to cite, but you could do an analysis. And sometimes that gets written up and it's not yet published. And we had one of those recently with a group that I work with, where it kind of ended up in the media getting kind of the both sides. Well, some scientists say this, but other people disagree. And would that have happened if it had been a peer-reviewed publication and had a little more? I don't know. It could have gone either way. So yeah, well, some it's unavoidable if the topic is of too much interest, maybe. So I am thinking, to Chasey's point, of like, are there ways potentially that we can look at certain common issues, or say an emitting source, and think about how we can reproduce that with as many validated techniques? Because in a survey we had just now, a lot of people are interested in local issues, how we can scale that widely with more methods that we've already developed. So hopefully there's some potential for that.
And I would definitely add on to his point of view of just, really relying on the people that are experts in these areas. So, when it comes to looking at satellite data, I saw this in an earlier presentation about wish lists. And I'm like, I have put a wish list together today of what I would like to do with some of the satellite data. With, working with experts here in the room, especially doing kind of a more comprehensive understanding of what's going on across the state of Wisconsin, some of the rural areas, in conjunction with APMA data that we have through our partners as well. And so for us, when we look, at what we're doing with our program, the Loma Air program, that's why we are considering so many different sources. So it's not just one piece of information, to really get kind of a comprehensive view of what's going on and where we should start focusing our efforts. But that's also to say that we think it's important everywhere. So it's just a matter of growing and being strategic with how we're growing and where we're going. So.
Okay, let me just check quickly. Do you have any questions online?
Yeah, we have about 4. But we can. I'm gonna go. I can.
Yeah, let's do one on.
Yeah. I'm gonna go from the oldest. From anonymous attendee. This is for Randall. Although the model shows a strong R-squared and captures observed temporal trends well, R-squared alone can mask substantial systematic bias. How does the model perform in terms of absolute error and bias rather than correlation alone? Specifically, when it predicts peak events, how confident are we in the magnitude of those peaks versus just their timing?
Sure, thanks for that question. I was just trying to simplify the message. We have RMSE, which may be what the questioner is interested in as a metric. It shows very similar tendencies, again, that it will bring in additional information from a chemical transport model that can reduce the RMSE. I think the question is also how do we do in terms of representing peak performance, and RMSE is a good measure of that. Although I'll argue R-squared is also useful in that too. I feel that it shows similar tendencies, and if this person is interested in following up further, I'm happy to answer questions offline as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We'll take another question in the room and then we'll cycle back to.
Hi, thank you all. Those were great talks. Randall, I'm sorry to put you on the spot again. But I'm just curious, so with this new, or I guess you've had a speciated product before, but this is more updated and things are getting better. So I'm wondering, like, now that we're improving these products and we have this like reliable, or at least like more reliable speciated product across the US, across the world, what are some of the key applications that you're hoping this data product will be used for?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So this is just composition data across North America. It is for the composition, it is not global yet. We have mass concentrations that are global, but thank you. For North America, one of the questions I'm interested in is, what is the relationship between ambient air quality and health endpoints, a variety of health endpoints? And it's interesting, PM 2.5 is the only air pollutant that is regulated without regard to chemical form. And it's plausible that certain chemical components are more harmful than others. And I would suspect that prior epidemiological studies that have attempted to address this question have been impeded by having a smaller sample size due to sparse measurements of chemical composition. So I'm hopeful that this type of data set could be useful for broadening the statistical power that's available to examine the relationship between ambient air quality and endpoints. That's one question. Another question could be understanding, again, what are the chemical components that we might want to think about for air quality control. And I alluded a little bit to that, but one could, of course, look at maps in more detail in order to understand specific regions where and when certain components are more important. One could look at this seasonally to try to understand different components. And I'm also just like making the data publicly available and seeing what other great ideas other people come up with. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to circle back to another question for Randall, just to give. This is from Malcolm Zachariah from the Oklahoma DEQ. What do the Wisconsin youth focus on the most with their Tempa data? In other words, what sticks in their mind? Is it for you?
Sorry, I was thinking it was going to Randall. You repeat that?
What do the Wisconsin youth focus on the most with the Tempo data? Or in other words, what sticks in their minds?
For them, it was the amount of exposure coming from Chicago. I hate to say that, sorry, Chicago people. But we had talked a lot, especially using our local air sensors about the local sources. And it wasn't always, like I mentioned, capturing what the exposures are, where we are located is one of the highest alpine burns across the whole city, and very close to some of the major highways, and unfortunately some pretty commonly used streets, and just many other local sources. But it wasn't always being captured in the local sensors. And so by bringing up tempo data, looking at that information, they actually had like I want them to be able to speak later, but like an actual physical response, like, oh my gosh, it's black, to really, just capturing their interest of what's going on. And and so just being more interested in understanding how it's not just the local, it's from what's further away, and then what can we do about that? So.
Okay, another question in the room.
Hi, thank you so much for the talks. They were very interesting. This question is for Kevin. So as a data journalist, I understand you have been working on stories regarding air pollution and the effects that they have on health for the broader community. I was wondering if you feel that air pollution is being more talked about right now, or has it always been the case that you usually there's more salience in the local news?
I think there might be more salience now because there's more data availability. around air pollution. So I mean, and there's also just, it's in the news a lot because of like regulatory rollbacks. So I mean, I think and a lot of other reasons too, like a lot of research has connected this to a lot of negative health outcomes. So I mean, there's kind of, in terms of what we read about the post, I've read a lot about research and a lot about like negative health impacts and what that all means at the ground level, but also every time you talk about a regulatory rollback, then you have to talk about why that regulation like took place in the first place and kind of get into it. So yeah, I mean, I think particularly with the current administration, there's all of the changes are bringing this about a lot more.
Just a little bit of follow-up. Hi, Kelly Bratburd. I'm from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. And just given that, I know one of the challenges that we as an industry have is in storytelling and really making sure that like the general public understands a lot of these heavy concepts that are really deep for us. And so I think maybe the question is, what is the media's role in helping us do that storytelling, and how are you connecting with the local and state agencies that are closest to communities' concerns?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we talk a lot with public sources. And so, I mean, in terms of our reporting, I mean, we're kind of constantly in touch with people on the ground, with agencies who work in this field and scientists. And I mean, in terms of the messaging, like, could you elaborate a little bit more?
So I'll say, let's say our constituents regularly consume news media, but they're not signed up for the air agency's regular alerts and updates. And so when you were talking about how every time there's a rollback, you have to go back and re-explain how air quality regulation works. Mm-hmm. So I think the first question is, in terms of storytelling, especially for researchers and agencies like mine, how can we do a better job of carrying forward that narrative so there isn't that salience every time we revisit these issues? That was like maybe one.
Yeah.
Two, like how do you leverage partnerships or coordinate with state and local agencies, because the rollback of one regulation federally can mean different things in San Francisco's Bay Area as opposed to Washington, D.C. And I've been very direct to both. So that's like a real kind of difference, especially coming from a national reporting standpoint, right? For these issues that are really local.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, I mean, I've worked primarily national. I worked at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel for 7 years as well. So, I mean, messaging is always difficult and like, trying to figure that out. But I would say, just like focusing on the actual impacts always helps. And talking about what that, just like basically what it means for people. So, sorry, I don't know about there for you.
Let's take another online.
Okay, an anonymous attendee, for Randall. How does your framework ensure that the deep learning component maintains geophysical consistency? And were there cases where the deep learning overcorrected the a priori information in a way that contradicted known atmospheric chemistry?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I guess a way to paraphrase the question maybe for the audience a little bit is, are we over predicting the result by bringing in more information sources? And we examine this by, when we conduct this model, we'll examine if there is a substantial increase in R² as a measure of skill when a predictor is added or subtracted, and vary the addition and subtraction of those predictors in order to ensure that it's not an overfitting result, but rather that it is a meaningful increase in skill. I'll pause here just because I think this is a more general audience, but if there are more technical questions, then again, I'm happy to discuss that further on.
Another question in the room? If not, we can take another online question.
Sure. Okay. we've worked through them. This is the last one I got on here. It's from Allison Patton. Thank you for the interesting panel discussion. I think this is going to be for you.
Okay.
The Chicago network uses a different sensor vendor known as Clarity, and a mixture of power sources, including solar panels for the more energy intensive sensors. Are the different network designers communicating with each other in any way that you might know?
I guess I'm not quite sure exactly what that is asking. So in terms of the, I guess, more clarification how they're communicating, like where.
I guess, so you have, I guess, the purple air sensors for the What My Air network. And then I think the questioner was talking about Chicago, was that right?
Yeah, I think they're asking just about continuity.
Yeah, so there's another network being deployed in Chicago is using a different low cost sensor technology. I guess the question is, yeah, have you had any communication, or do you know if the purple air and the Clarity people might have had communication behind the scenes?
That I am not aware of. In terms of, yeah, I don't know if anybody else on the panel might know this. If Purple Air and Clarity.
I don't know Purple Air and Clarity, but I was going to say shout out to Kristen O'Cloran, who had the pre-recorded virtual flash talk. She's done a lot of work at NASA of trying to figure out where these different low-cost sensor networks are and trying to think about how we can link them. So she might be a good person to talk about that.
I was going to sneak in a purple Clarity thing and a question. If DC is using both purple and Clarity, and we've got co-location and stuff, and so we're trying to puzzle through this. And then I also just want to shout out to folks that up there who also work with all of those different types of sensors and are also productively banging their heads against this very question. So happy to talk offline would be more about like what it means to have a mixed low-cost sensor network and how to make sense of that. And then I did also actually have a question, but I don't know if we're not ready to move on from this yet.
I'll also just say we do have a new Tiger team that's going to be working on low-cost sensors led by
I think we move on.
Okay, the question was going to be for everyone but Randall. No, just kidding. Actually, for the more public-facing folks, to kind of ask maybe the second part of the question at Tracy to kick off the questions about like when is the data good enough? When is the data good enough for what? And so the question is, what is a use or implication or application of the data for those of you in public-facing roles that you've stumbled across or encountered in your conversations with the public that most surprised you, either in its novelty or just in its depth or significance or whatever it was?
For us, our sensor network is, we have a dashboard, and actually I can kind of combine these two answers. So with the first question, so as I mentioned, City of Madison does have sensors on our dashboard. So we have been working with the company managing the dashboard to work through what correction factors need to get applied so that the information being put out is similar and that there isn't a major difference. But we've done that on our end of things, not necessarily Purple Air talking with Clarity. So that might answer that a little bit. And then ours is really education focused. So it isn't like this is the gold standard of air quality, which you should be creating policies over. It's really that stepping stone to bringing awareness among community members. And then when and if there's interest about specific concerns, then we pursue a little bit more with experts in the field to look at some of these major, concerns that come up. And so for us, it's that building block to, increasing awareness. We have some researchers through UW Madison who are analyzing the data in great detail, which is amazing to me because they're telling me all about the millions of data points that they're sifting through and all of those things. So, and then some of the toxicologists from our Department of Health Services are also looking at the data. So we're relying on experts to really look at some trends that we could possibly share out with the communities. But as of a day-to-day, connection, it's really just that awareness piece for us.
I don't know, I can't pick favorites here, but the first thing that popped in mind, I think maybe adds on to that previous question, was some of the ports work from the last HAQAST, where there were these backlogs happening in ports. And we're looking at Los Angeles, I think, New York, and seeing these plumes in NO2 because they were close to the shore and that was having problems, which led to eventually the moving the boats offshore further offshore, so it's not affecting the population as much during these backlogs. And I'm thinking there's maybe some examples like that where it's sort of awareness and or the policy window is maybe wider or there's more volunteer actions that can be like, oh, we can do something about this right now, where it kind of makes sense to not wait for the full rigorous evaluation, where people have more opportunities to change things right away. So there's some examples like that I think make good case studies.
I don't think, I mean, I'm kind of an end user of data, so I rely on that. I mean, I haven't done a ton of reporting on air pollution. So I mean, one of the major things that I've been working on for the last few years is sea level rise and changing precipitation patterns. And so we deal with a lot of satellite products and precipitation. And so there are some are better for other things, like everything's different, right? So there's like MSWeb, which we might use to look at like extreme precipitation. So like 95th or 99th percentile events. So we're going back and forth between products kind of all the time to just do different, talk about different stories in different parts of the globe. But yeah, I mean, we do a lot of work and a lot of interviews with scientists to kind of like figure out our methodology, what we are going to do. And it is kind of that we do a little bit of work on a little bit faster than like a publication, like a journal, publication schedule.
Angie Bacon supplied, but I have a question after you, Kevin, about what can scientists do if you have a story that you really want to get out in the world? Like, do you have suggestions? But obviously there's communication institutions, but like, do you have suggestions for how people could help get your story noticed by the community about it?
Sure. I mean, we love exclusivity for sure. I mean, because there are certain things that you do want to publish as widely as possible. But one thing for the post, and I mean, a lot of outlets would do this too, is if you've done like a truly novel analysis and have created kind of like a cool data set that could be spatial in nature or something that is cutting edge. One thing that we would be able to do is kind of, dedicate some graphics and visuals to it and really kind of like explore the research and the novel aspect of it and then get that and then use that in the storytelling and kind of promote the research that way and whatever it may be. I mean, do you have an example? Sorry.
I don't really do that kind of work.
Okay.
I think for other people, but also just thinking like if you had a story, like is it cold call to you? Would that work, or how do you kind of get someone? How do you get them?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, emailing and trying to set up a call is always a great idea because we're constantly. I mean, we do get a lot of messages for sure, but not from scientists typically. So we get a lot of people trying to get into the inbox, but it's not always science sources. And so I think, I mean, I'll speak for the reporters there and maybe you can talk to it. Yeah.
I'm a freelance journalist. I think the number, I think we always shocked at how many scientists reach out to us directly. And like how much we don't often respond to comms people because I know they're trying to sell what their university will love, but for the scientists emails, which is rare. And I would encourage all of you to find your favorite journalists and email them. They will jump on that because they know there's a possibility of getting an exclusive and they know that this is a big deal if the scientist is reaching out to you.
Agreed. Yeah. I have a few questions for Sarah. Hi, my name is Wilton. I'm from South Coast Air Quality Management District in the Los Angeles area. Very nice talk about the Love My Air Wisconsin project. I was curious, the title of this session is Improving Awareness of Data, and I was curious for low-cost sensor deployments in the communities. What kind of efforts are taken to engage with the communities on their input on where sensors should be deployed, especially if the communities have significant fraction of the population are not English speaking. So, for example, in Deloitte, are there Spanish resources or Sheboygan or Hmong resources for them to understand about the sensors in the dashboard of the project?
Yeah, thank you. So we are working primarily with school districts. And so we really rely on, again, kind of that combination of data that we have from our sources, but then also relying on the district to identify where they feel the highest need is. There's also considerations like what other low-cost sensor networks are in those areas. There's already some low-cost sensors in Beloit, so there's one on the high school already. So, again, kind of using what they already have in place to make sure that what we're adding to is building out the network versus, duplicating any efforts. And so looking at that across, every area that we're going into, we're making sure that we're trying to do those partnerships. And then in terms of language support, so we are an extension of Children's Wisconsin, which is a local hospital system. So we try to have all of our communication available in Spanish as well. And then if there's a request for additional languages, we have that opportunity that we can request for it to be translated into other languages. So almost all of our resources are also in Spanish. Anything that has like a poster to it, like we will advertise, like this community has a sensor, that's also in Spanish. And then if we're at events, we also try to have, if there's any major, events, that we try to have somebody that can also speak Spanish available with us. And then we're hosting the City of Madison sensors. They've joined our dashboard, and they actually worked with local partners. They approach their system a little bit differently. And so they actually worked with local partnerships to identify places, and they went to the community centers, and then they had different people come up and put pins on maps where they want them. And overwhelmingly, the locations they selected were youth-focused, school-based youth organizations. So it kind of, again, confirmed like we're doing the right thing. We're working with schools, trying to keep our focus on youth. So, and the ELMA rates as well. So.
Thank you. And then another question I had is, have you ever had instances of members of the public or the children's parents that they approach you with, like they saw on their phone an app told them the air quality was this kind of level, and then maybe the EPA air now said it was this kind of level, and then the sensor recording a different kind of level. How do you handle that kind of, if any of the community members or parents have asked you about those differences in air quality messaging?
So far, we have not received any sort of feedback like that. I'm guessing we might have, our air quality tends to be a little bit different than I'm sure you're experiencing out in California. So, so far, no, we really haven't had parents come to us with that. Most of the feedback we're receiving is just like, wow, this is amazing. Like, I didn't know this existed, and they're really excited that we are building this network to kind of add to the regulatory sensors that are out there. And so, yeah, and we do, it's on our, the kiosk that we have that is in the museums right now. We do make that identification that our sensors are low cost, and that regulatory monitors are kind of that, they're just a higher quality. And so, yes, there might be some difference in our data.
And also, I've got a Spanish sensor guide I could share with you after this.
Okay. Great.
All right. Yeah.
Thank you, Carl. Well, first I'll say, my neighbor just 2 days ago said the exact question that you're saying, like, my phone doesn't agree with the monitors, but a lot of the phone data is coming from some of these multi-source data products. And so this is a question for all of you. I think one of the themes that I've heard from this panel is how heterogeneous the landscape is of data products. There's the Tempo platform, there's Love My Air, there's other sensors, there's Randall's data, there's NASA data. And then, actually to your point about the exclusives, Kevin, I think it was The Guardian that put up a PM 2.5 database based on researchers like down to the street level type of product. And so, I think that this like broad, diverse data ecosystem has a lot of strengths. And of course, there's also the EPA data distribution sources. But I think it also makes it very confusing for people to know where to find data and which data to trust. And I guess I'm wondering if maybe each of you could kind of comment on what you see as either like the good sides, the bad sides, or both of this free market ecosystem that we're in right now around air quality and health data.
Okay, I think that's a great question. It's going to be a growing issue. It's something that we allude to in our review about the privatization of satellite data. So NASA obviously has the best data. I can just say that. Increasingly there are companies, even nonprofit organizations, EDF, like sent up its own satellites. It's becoming more and more possible for different entities to do that. And I do think, similar to the question with the low-cost sensors, that the more data you have is good for a certain point for awareness for areas that you didn't previously cover. But then I think as it gets more and more saturated, there's a lot of potential for confusion and disagreement. And, the question is, how do we as a community want to sort of validate all these? How do we want to communicate that out to the public? Exactly like you talk to your neighbor, you're getting the questions from the comment. I've heard those questions too. And, and as in Miami, they were like, we just go to the government website when there's fires and check, it was like one answer. When I went out to California, it was like, well, I only use this network, but this one says this and this did, and so I think there's a risk there that we kind of split apart, and it would be good if we kind of come to more of an agreement for our own sake and to avoid litigation.
Great question. I think it's terrific that there are a variety of different data sources available because it enables nimbleness for different groups to innovate. And when they have an idea and they want to proceed, go ahead. I don't think there should be restrictions. As a user, be skeptical. Look at the data set that you're looking at. Look at its pedigree. Look at how it's produced. And ask yourself questions about whether the data makes sense in your own mind. Maybe compare it with another data set if you have time to do so. Maybe think of it the same way you think of when you're reading something on the internet. You read something, is it anecdotal? Is it something that's substantive? What's the level of history behind it? And I encourage you to look at data that very same way.
I mean, we deal with this a lot, and we tend to go with official sources for a lot of the data. So NASA, NOAA, a lot of federal agencies or state agencies, we tend to rely on that because that's kind of gold standard. It's been vetted. We get a lot of private companies pitching data, like a lot of the air quality monitors companies will, and we definitely use some of that. But it depends. If there's kind of more official data available, we'll typically lean on that. But if it's quick turnaround and we have a reliable data source, then we use that too. But we have kind of the same questions that maybe your neighbors have sometimes.
Yeah.
Search your mind.
And I would say as I took this position that I'm in right now, my background was, I was an educator for about 13 years, and I was in special education, so not even the sciences. And it was very overwhelming and very confusing at first, trying to understand all of these different elements that go into air quality. And then, I think that for my expertise in special ed, of taking some very complex topic and then breaking it down into different, scaffolding it, breaking it down into manageable pieces is really where I found my stride with this information. And so, again, I kind of look at what the audience that our program is serving is really meant for families with children with asthma and health for kids. And so when I look at the data that we're sharing, it really goes, I just kind of keep that at the foundation of this is really building up and understanding that air quality impacts health. And so PM 2.5 being one of the most serious, pollutants out there, starting there. And then as the awareness and understanding grows, then, layering in some of these other pieces that are impacting air quality, ambient air quality. Then, it gets into so many technical things. I've even caught myself recently going into areas that I'm like, I know this now, that when I first started this position, I was not as aware of. And that's also huge credit to being part of HAQAST. That's really enhanced my understanding. And so, I look at it as, for me, the audience I'm trying to serve and what's a manageable amount of information to give, what's appropriate, and what's just kind of, that's a nice to know in the future type of thing.
All right, thank you. We're at the end of our session, so let's thank our panelists.